All right. Good evening, everyone. So we'll get started here. Scout sign. I'm sorry, Scout salute and pledge to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag, the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now we do the Scout sign. Scout oath. On my honor, I will do my best to do my duty to God and my country, and to obey the Scout law, to help other people at all times, to keep myself physically strong, mentally awake, and morally straight.
All right, for those that did not hear earlier, we are continuing on with Public Health Merit Badge. Christian's got all sorts of fun, interesting stuff for us tonight. Christian, you just want the, you said slide 39?
Yeah, let me just, right before you start that here, let me just introduce Mike. So I want to introduce my father-in-law, Eli and Lucas's grandfather, Mr. Michael Kreiser. He was kind enough to join us this evening. Mr. Kreiser was the former operation maintenance supervisor of the Swatara Township Authority Water Pollution Control Plant. That's quite a title there. Rolls off your tongue, Mike. Yeah. But you're going to find there's not too many more people that know more about poop than Mr. Kreiser and water treatment. He had training, he was 4 years in the Air Force. And then, of course, he has pretty well held that job in supervisor position until his retirement a few years ago, but still keeps all his certifications up and all those accolades that he still needs to do to remain active in that. So I think he's going to be very informative tonight. We're going to first start off with a video, and then after that, I'd like you guys to ask him some questions. When you have a question, go off of mute and then ask him the question, and then go back off again so he can answer it for you then, okay? So go ahead. I'm going to go to mute here, Tim. If you want to start with the video, we'll start with this about water treatment. All righty. Here we go. All right. Before we get to some questions, Mike, is there anything that you want to add on that as far as that maybe the video felt short on or didn't cover enough?
Well, it's almost impossible in a 10-minute video to cover everything that occurs in a wastewater treatment plant. But he was much more entertaining doing it than I'll ever be. I'm kind of a dry speaker. He was entertaining, but a couple things he said that I found when he said about you may be drinking somebody else's pee and poop within days, you may be drinking somebody's pee and poop within a day. I mean, it goes into the treatment plant. Basically, it's a day in the treatment plant, goes out into the receiving stream, and depending on how far downstream the next water plant is, that's when it's going to be treated in a water plant and somebody's going to consume it again. And there actually are facilities where they're reusing the wastewater. They're basically what they did, they put the water treatment plant right on the end of the wastewater plant. And instead of putting it back into a receiving stream where it actually becomes, in most cases, the treatment plant, the effluent from the treatment plant is cleaner than the receiving body of water. So if you put it in the stream, the water plant downstream has to remove not only what's left of the effluent from the treatment plant, but also all the pollutants in the stream itself, like a lot of agricultural runoff, because there's quite a bit of that in Pennsylvania, and it's a big contributor to the pollution in the streams. What else? There was a couple things. He mentioned all the bacteria in the human body, And that's where the bacteria comes from that you use in the activated sludge process. On the video that's up, or on this picture that is up now, basically you'll see 4 rectangular tanks and just below them 2 large circular tanks. And that's all part of the activated sludge process where the microorganisms are allowed to build up in the Swadara treatment plant. And that's about it. Like I say, video was short. Like if I gave you a tour of the Swadara plant, you'd probably be there 2 to 3 hours.
True. So those rectangular and then the 2 circular on the bottom right, is that considered part of the primary process then?
The primary is everything in the upper, it would be the upper right-hand corner.
Okay.
There's if you see there's a rectangular, well, it's actually square, that's a pump station. It's below the 2 circular tanks there.
Okay.
The
Okay.
upper right-hand corner.
Gotcha.
That's the pump station, and the way it works in just about all treatment plants is you pump it to a high point, and all your wastewater then flows by gravity through the treatment plant to the outfall. So you don't have to repump the waste. You do have to pump, like the activated sludge process. You actually remove that in the large circular tanks at the lower left corner. That what settles out in there is pumped back to the rectangular tanks and the 2 large circular tanks. It's called activated sludge.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I was just, and that map that you guys are seeing, that's actually where he worked at. That's the Swatara Township. So that's an aerial view that I found on the internet there that was listed on the website. That was kind of the best pick I could get, but you can kind of see the layout there. So that's what we're actually looking at with that. So any questions from you guys? If you do, then take the mute off and then ask a question if you guys want. Is there any questions? Anyone?
That's what I was afraid.
Is it true that this is what Air Force pukes do? Is they go into poop stuff?
He's a Navy guy, so just let him. Just excuse him.
No, Air Force guys go into the Air Force because we had the best chow.
No.
I wanted to be an aircraft mechanic, but I didn't. My eyes were that bad that they didn't want me having anything to do with that type of thing. So I ended up.
So I have some questions for you, Mr. Kreiser. So there's, you guys know from watching the videos, does anybody know, and you guys can turn off your moon and respond, what was the percentage of the actual septic systems that are in the United States that don't use this type of system that's in your backyard? Does anybody remember from the video what the percentage was? 25, that's right.
As I said, Charlie's got it right.
Yeah. Now, I saw some numbers 24 something to 25, but that gives you the general idea. So, but 75% is of the water, our urine and poop is processed through this process. So it's a pretty big deal. And I think I saw, I don't know, that other video, I think, what was there, like 16 plants in New York City, Mike, from that other video we watched? Something like that. There's like, I think there's like 16 plants, water treatment plants in New York City to handle all that. No, something like that.
It's 14.
14, okay.
And they actually treat 1.3, combined, they treat 1.3 billion gallons of water a day.
A day.
And they were one of the last major cities in the U.S. to actually go to secondary treatment. And unfortunately, the big problem is with the older cities, well, most of the cities, is they have combined sewer systems because they had stormwater systems. And then when they eat, the city of Harrisburg's a perfect example. The city of Harrisburg has a combined sewer system, okay? So the sanitary sewer flows into the storm sewer. And during dry weather, all the flow goes to the treatment plant. During a wet weather event, it's impossible to build a treatment plant big enough to handle wet weather flows, stormwater flows. So they actually, the city of Harrisburg, I don't know if they still have all of them, but they used to have like 43 overflows directly into the Susquehanna River. So as soon as you had a major storm, these are automatic bypasses. They have like a float in them. And when the level in the sewer comes up to a certain point, the float lifts a gate and all the untreated sewage goes out, both storm and sanitary goes out to the Susquehanna River. And they have a permit for each one of those, a permit for each one of those overflows, and they have to monitor the level of pollutants that go out into the Susquehanna. See how I can ramble on once like that?
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things that they swear in New York City. They swear that the bagels are so good because they use the water out of the Hudson after the water treatment, and that's supposedly what makes the bagels so good. There's actually places that ship the Hudson water around the country so they can make the bagels that taste like New York City. Does anybody know that? That's actually a true fact.
They don't get most of their water from the Hudson.
I know. That's just one of the things they swear about. It's funny that people actually pay for the water to be shipped about from that. But anyway, that's one of the claims, which is a scary thought.
If you saw, there was I forget the movie, but anyway, there was a big chase scene in this tunnel they were constructing. And that tunnel was actually a tunnel that they built to bring water from a reservoir up into Catskills down to New York City.
Oh, wow.
That was the Bruce Willis film.
Yes.
Yeah. Die Hard. Yeah. One of the
Die Hard 2.
Yeah.
That's what I thought it was. I thought you were talking about too. Yeah. Interesting.
The tunnel does exist.
So and that was one of the other questions I had too, was the process. And some of the videos said 24 to 36. So you're saying within 24 hours that water's coming out. That's amazing how quick of a process that is.
36 is hours. You need, because if you're going to do that, you have to have enough tankage to hold, combined tankage to hold the waste in the treatment plant for that period of time. And Swatara's plant was 6.3 million gallons a day. And each one of those large circular tanks was over 1 million gallons of capacity. So yeah, the final clarifiers, they were about 1 million a piece. Because those circular tanks, they're the aeration tanks, the ones that for the activated sludge, they were 14 feet deep.
Wow.
So combined, like I say, combined, you get about 24 hours of detention time in the plant, because it takes that long. The whole basis, or what a treatment plant does. If you were to take and discharge to a stream, what occurs in a treatment plant, with the exception of disinfection, would occur in the stream. The only thing is, it would have a negative impact. It would kill the fish. It would create stench. You'd have an overabundance of plant life in the stream. So what you do is you take build a treatment plant, and you take what would happen in the stream and you condense it so that everything happens in as short a period of time as possible, so that you settle out all the solids, your biological mass, you build up this huge biological mass, and it consumes the organics in the treatment plant. So you're taking what happens in the stream, condensing it, and, you know, making sure under a controlled and extremely controlled environment so that when you discharge it, like I say, the disinfection is what actually kills the pathogens at the end of the treatment process.
So the 3 disinfectants that I saw that are available, and the guy talked about 2 of them. He said about the chlorine, which is what I understand what you use, Mike, there at the township, right? You use the
Right.
chlorine type thing. And then there was ozone and there was UV light. Do you know any plants that use those other options?
I don't
Ozone or
off the top of my head, I don't know of anyone that ozonates, okay, because that
okay.
really energy, because you
Yeah.
the ozone electrically, okay. It's the process of high voltage, and I'm not real familiar with it because I don't know
Okay.
the way that did it. But quite a few of the plants are going to the UV lamps, especially the smaller plants. Like I'm chairman of the West Hanover Township Sewer Authority, and we have a UV process. UV is expensive. The lamps, to relamp one of the UV chambers is about $10,000. And you're going through at least one bank a year. And it takes a lot of electricity. And the big one, there's 2 drawbacks to UV as your, well, 3 really. The tubes get dirty and then they become inefficient because you have the sewage flowing across them. The UV light, while it kills the pathogens, it doesn't have a residual. So you don't know for 24 hours if your UV disinfection is working or not. Whereas with chlorine, when you apply chlorine to the waste, your goal is to maintain a residual. So in other words, after you go through the chlorine contact tank, where your wastewater comes in contact with the chlorine, at the end of those tanks, because you have a detention time in there, by the end of that process, theoretically, the chlorine has met its demand. It's killed all the pathogens, and then you want a chlorine residual of less than 1. But that tells you, and you can do a chlorine residual anytime. In other words, you can actually, there's plants that have an automated residual analyzer on them. That's what I heard. You may now. But UV light, the only way to tell if you actually were effective is fecal coliform analysis, and that requires a 24-hour incubation period. So you don't know the next day if you had a problem or not. And of course, by that time, you polluted the stream, but you know.
Now, are they finding that the UV light, and of course you said the ozone because they're using electrical, are they both more expensive than the chlorinated process?
Right, they're more expensive, but the chlorine, chlorine can actually, under certain conditions, chlorine reacts with organics and you get chlorinated organics. And certain chlorinated organics are carcinogens. So you have to really run a close watch on your chlorine so that you're just meeting your demand for disinfection and not putting an excessive amount of chlorine out into the receiving stream.
Is that why you think some people are looking at the UV light as another alternative now?
Yeah, and chlorine is, of course, very toxic. It's dangerous. It's nasty stuff. And we got it in 1-ton cylinder. And if you have a leak, you have a problem because you inhale 1 shot of chlorine and you're down. One good breath of chlorine and you're going down.
Yeah.
You hold your breath and go in and turn the valve on.
Nasty. Oh, I guess the other question I had as far as who handles in the state the certification and how often is that done? Is that a yearly thing, Mike?
No, DEP does the certificate. They handle the certification, and you have to take a rather extensive initial test. And then to maintain your license, your certification, you have to take 30 continuing education units over a 3-year period. And
Okay.
they maintain that. Anyone, they approve all the courses. And then what happens is you take a course, and whoever's providing the course has to forward the results of the course and the fact that you attended the course to DEP, and they enter this into their data bank. So when you go to apply for renewal, they already know if you have the required 30 credit hours to renew your certification. I've continued. I still have mine, but it expires in December of this year, and I don't know if I want to get the 30. When I worked, when I was gainfully employed, they paid for all the courses and everything. I had to take them, but they paid for it. Now I'm paying it out of pocket, and I'm on this will be my third renewal since I retired. If I go,
Yeah. It's not as fun when you have to shell it out yourself in the agency, that's for sure. Hey, Tim, was there any other questions on the plant layout at all from any of you guys? I haven't seen anything in the chat.
Question I have, it's not about the layout. What kind of damage does car oil do to the plant? I mean, I've seen where, people will, it does, not that I've seen it, but I've heard of people that rather than take their oil to a recycling place, they'll just dump it down the drain. Is there damage to the plant that occurs because of that?
Not really. As long as it's not a large volume, what happens is just like it floats to the top of the surface, and then you skim it off into it actually, the motor oil kind of congeals with the animal fats and all that, and you just get this mass of grease floating to the top of the primary clarifiers, and then you skim that off. And that actually, years ago, when I first started at Sweat was a brand new plant when I started there, and we had an incinerator. So we burned incinerated our sludge, and we incinerated anything that we skimmed off the top of the primary and final clarifiers. Fortunately, of course, the greases and oils was very volatile, so it acted like a supplemental fuel when we pumped it into the furnace. But now with we shut the furnace down after about 25 years of operation, because it was going to take more than what it had cost to originally construct the furnace to meet the new air quality standards. What we'd have had to do modification wise to meet air quality standards on the exhaust from the furnace, it just was cost prohibitive. So now the grease just goes to the landfill. Can't really use it for land application, so it's taken off long. The grit and the grease come off in the primary process, and normally all you do is put that in a dumpster and have it hauled to the landfill.
Although regarding septic systems, Mike, that you said is one of the most common reasons why things get clogged, though, is because of a lot of dumping cooking oils, vegetable oils, and all that stuff down the sink.
Yeah. That's, people dump all kind of cooking oils, and I've got a pan here, it's got bacon fat in it, dump it down the drain. Well, it goes down the drain, but it doesn't take long before it congeals, and we always just hoped it congealed in the customer's lateral, so it wasn't our problem. Once it got to the sewer main, we had problems with like restaurants, where a large restaurant was connected to to the sewer line. And if we were going to have a blockage from grease, it was normally on a line that served a restaurant. They just,
Yeah.
they dumped their.
So one thing at home for you guys too is when your parents like cooking or using vegetable oil, olive oil, whatever it is, or like bacon fat, is get like a metal can or something and dump it in there and dispose of it another way. Don't be dumping it down your sink or even these, especially those disposal food grinders. So it's better to dump it in something else, get rid of it and expose of it.
Right. The wastewater treatment plant really isn't designed to treat garbage. It's only meant to treat human excrement, and the little bit of toilet paper that goes with it. People, plenty of places have garbage grinders, but they're not something that it creates problems, because if it goes down the garbage, it may be organic, but a lot of it isn't readily biodegradable. So you can chop it up, do whatever you want, but when you send it to the treatment plant, our microbes don't like banana peels,
Yes.
So it ends up coming out normally in the primaries, and then you have to treat it in a different way than the waste activated sludge.
What was one of the strangest things you found, like in the primary part that you filtered out? What's one of the strangest things that one of your employees found at the plant?
Well, actually, I found a groundhog. I thought it was and it wasn't. I found this groundhog, and by that time, most of the fur had come off of it, and I was afraid to actually pull it out because it was caught in a basket, a catch basket in a pump station, and I was afraid it was a fetus, a baby.
Oh,
Because it wasn't 6-8 months before that they had actually pulled a fetus out of the influent at the Dairytown treatment plant.
no kidding.
Wow. My heart being in my throat. Oh man.
I guess.
I got a question, Christian.
Okay.
Hey, so when some of the over-the-counter products you can buy at like a hardware store that puts enzymes into your home system to like make sure that your pipes stay cleaned out and stuff like that, if your water from things like some of the fats in foods and cleanup and that kind of thing, does that affect the system downstream?
Not really, because they're again, like you said, they're enzymes, and they're only good if the bacteria is present to break down the grease, and then when they get to the treatment plant, the bacteria utilize the enzymes, because it's kind of like a vitamin for bacteria is what it is.
Yeah.
It, unfortunately, if you don't have the right bacteria, you can dump all the enzymes in the world down the drain, and it's not gonna. I mean, they sold restaurants are supposed to have grease traps. So what they do, instead of cleaning the grease traps like they're supposed to, they do what you say. They go out and buy enzymes, thinking this would break down the grease in the grease trap so that they didn't have to clean them. And to some extent, it would work sometimes. But then, yeah, if it gets to the treatment plant, if the grease gets to the treatment plant because it's been put into solution, it's pretty tough to get out. It actually you can have a carry through.
Good question, Mr. Robinson. All right, Tim, do I have, if there's any other questions here? Okay, Isaiah, why don't you hit your mute thing off and ask a question?
I actually have two questions.
Okay.
First one is, why did you decide to become a water treatment plant person? A former, a maintenance, whatever it is?
I actually, when I joined the Air Force, when I got, and Charlie, he knows how this works. Back when I joined the Air Force in 1968, uh, I went to basic training and they asked me what you wanted to be. And of course, they had a whole list of career fields. And I wanted to be an aircraft mechanic, a hydraulics, da, da, da. Anyway, when I got out of right before I got out of basics, you went down and they told you what you were going to be, Isaiah, and they told me I was going to be a sanitation specialist. Well, I was mortified because I thought I was going to be a garbage truck driver. And unfortunately, sanitation included water, wastewater, and different within that, they call it your career field. And I actually started out in water. And well, we did both. We trained in both water and wastewater, but I was in the water plant. And I found water very boring because there's no challenge. Chemicals set up and everything. It runs, and whereas wastewater is a challenge. The microorganisms never read the book. So you're fighting with the microorganisms every day to make sure you maintain a balance of food, microorganisms, air, and all this is your responsibility. And like I say, if you develop the wrong type of bacteria, you could develop a filamentous bacteria, and that bacteria forms a mat. And instead of settling in your final clarifiers, it's buoyant and comes to the surface. And now everything you're trying to remove comes out in your outflow. So like I say, I didn't pick it. It wasn't something, I didn't graduate from high school and say, boy, I want to get into wastewater. But once I got into it, I spent 38 years in it. And it's a good career field. If anybody, they're looking for people, the baby boomers are leaving the trade, and it really is a great career field. Like during this virus thing, all the wastewater guys were working. They got a check. Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah, on my wish list, they didn't do anything. They wanted me for brain surgeon.
Probably more like line you up to get to a brain surgeon.
Yeah, I don't. You can't have a lobotomy and then become a brain surgeon, Charlie. It doesn't work like that.
I think Isaiah had another question.
Yeah, Isaiah. You got another one, buddy?
Yeah. How long ago did you start?
I started in 1968. I actually started in 68, got out of the Air Force in May of 1972, and I was an airframe mechanic on Chinook helicopters at New Cumberland Army Depot for May, June, about 4 months. And I had put an application in at SWAT-ARA. They called me up. I went down and
The other cards out there.
I started work at SWAT-ARA the day after Labor Day, 1972. And the guy I was the assistant superintendent, and the guy that was the superintendent left and went to work for Gannett Fleming in February of 72. And I became superintendent and never got a promotion after that because that was as far as you could go.
Nice. So you didn't pick it, it picked you, but a good career. That's great.
It definitely picked me.
Yeah.
Like I say, and one thing you have to remember when you get into the wastewater field, everything from chemists to plumber. I had an electronics technician. I had lab technicians. I had process specialists. I had guys out in the collection system. I had a 6-man collection system crew. We televised, did internal televising of sewer lines looking for damage, a flush rig. there's a lot of different things you can do. And like I say, that's why I really enjoyed it, because I got involved with all of it. You know, I was responsible for the whole enchilada.
Yeah, and that was the nice thing about it, guys. One benefit of going through the military, he had the training provided there. So, again, with other different fields and military branches, they provide you the training and, getting paid at the same time. So, that's one thing to always keep in mind. But like Mr. Kreiser said, there's a lot of different specialties in water treatment. So just something to keep in mind.
I was fortunate, of course, back then. Vietnam was hot and heavy, and I ended up in Korea just by luck of the draw.
Different part of Asia.
Yeah.
Was there any other questions? If not, we'll, Tim, do I have control of the thing now at this point?
You do not, but we can certainly fix that here in a moment.
Good. We're going to go through a few more slides here, Mike, and then at that point, you're welcome to stay on.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Is it mainly the developed countries that have waste treatment and the second world countries just dump it? Or is it considered pretty much worldwide that they take care of treatment?
Unfortunately, Charlie, the most of your third world countries anyway, wastewater treatment's the last thing on the list. The third world countries, when I got to Korea, that was in 71, 72, and we had basically primary treatment. We had MHOF tanks, which are just settling tanks, okay, on the base, and then it discharged right into the Yellow Sea. And the local community, they had no formal wastewater treatment. Even the town of Kunsan, which was the base was outside of, they were still using what they call benjo ditches and privies. And you drive down, a benjo ditch is basically a ditch that has a concrete slab over top of it with holes cut in it, and people would just go and take care of their business on the benjo ditch. You'd be driving down the road, and here'd be this mama-san with her kimono covering everything, but she was taking care of business. So yeah, that's, like I say, wastewater treatment is probably the last thing that take care of in a developing country. Well, even I wanted to mention that I was in Montreal looking at a piece of sludge dewatering equipment, and I was amazed. All the treatment plants in the Montreal proper and all the suburbs, they were all just primary treatment. There wasn't one of them that was secondary. So all they were doing was just whatever settled or floated, they removed and they discharged. But, the St. Lawrence River up there is huge. And the old adage was dilution is the solution to pollution. And they pretty much lived by it.
So they just did primary, and then that was it, and they released it.
And I'm talking, Montreal's a big city, and I went to 3 different treatment plants that had the equipment that I was looking at installed in them, and all of them were primary plants.
Nice. That's interesting.
Our neighbors to the north.
Yeah. I guess even though everything's saving the earth, it's interesting still. We're making progress, right? So on this next slide here, it just gives the basic layout. It's rudimentary, but what it went in the video was more thorough. But leaving your house goes to a bar screen, and the grist chambers, and like Mr. Kreiser had said, it goes through the gravity as like his plan. So the gravity helps pull it off, which then goes to the primary, the settling tanks. The biosolids is produced, and then at that point you're going through the different filtrators, actually to the point where then it gets activated, as he had said, in their plant through the chlorination and the effluent before it goes into the water makes it safe for drinking at that point. So that's just the basic layout there. Much more complicated than that, but that was probably, as I think between the video and his explanation, it at least was the best thing that we can do right now under isolation. So some of the things I did want to go over, and that's the thing that had come up to. And when we digest food, we have enzymes that start the digestive process, but in our bodies, through the stomach starting down, the intestines, the large intestines, we actually have bacteria. If we don't have bacteria in our body, we actually can't break down the food. Just like the materials broken down in the sewer plant, our bodies help break and digest the food, which then absorbs the nutrients into our body, the protein, the fat, the carbohydrates, but we need bacteria. And that's the one thing when we overprescribe antibiotics, what often happens is that good bacteria that's in our stomach lining gets destroyed. And over time, we can't absorb food, which we result in nutritional problems. And then also what can result in is diarrhea conditions such as C. difficile and other things, because now the good bacteria is destroyed and the bad bacteria grows, which can lead to other problems. So for our bodies, we actually need that bacteria. And that's why when I do antibiotics for patients, I always tell them to usually do acidophilus or something to increase that good bacteria to help your digestive system. If you're on antibiotics for a long time, that definitely can have problems with that. And some people that get C. difficile sometimes deal off and on with that for the rest of their lives. It can be a chronic problem because their digestive system never recovers from that bad bacteria that overtakes the bowel system. Now, one of the important things in water treatment while we do that, and it's important in public health as you're looking at it, is we talked about bacteria, E. coli, salmonella. Why do we know those two? Because of food poisoning. And that's the one thing without water treatment, when you go to these third world countries, they have severe outbreaks. Another thing is when you go to stagnant lakes and it's not having a lot of natural flow, a lot of times you have E. coli outbreaks in some of these lakes and ponds and they have to be shut down. I know Cadorus, that happened a few years ago. If it's a dry season and not a lot of spring flow, that can happen. So that's why you're not supposed to pee in the ponds or pee in the lakes, because it does build up over time. As well as with going to the bathroom. That's exceptional. The other diseases they talked about in the video, typhoid, which is a bacterial disease that can spread, resulting in usually your typical headache, belly pain, and constipation or diarrhea. And then also cholera. This is something we're going to talk about at the end of the presentation about outbreaks. And when you look at third world countries, even back in India in the 1800s, they had some really devastating, deadly cholera outbreaks. And basically the reason is that basically your stool and byproducts was mixing with the water and it was staying stagnant. So they were drinking it out of. They had a lot of outbreaks in South America at some point, but I'm going to go over some of that outbreaks. But that's basically a type of infection that causes it in your intestine. And this builds up a pretty toxic level. They produce toxins that cause a lot of damage. They estimate about 2.9 million cases, 95,000 deaths each year in the world. So even though in the United States here, of course, there are countries that are still struggling with this, and that's why just basically the World Health Organization is really still pushing clean water and sewer treatments, which is such a necessity in the world. And with cholera, it does result in about 1% mortality. And the outbreak that occurred in the 1800s was very devastating. There was quite a few people, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people that were dying around certain parts of the country. So hopefully as progress, it continues. The other one we talked about is hepatitis. That can spread. Hepatitis A is very commonly. That can spread from what's called stool to mouth. If you drink it, you get it. And that can, of course, affect your liver. The other things that we have are talk about parasites that's in stool, hookworms, giardia. If you guys are drinking, this is why we filter water. We go on hikes. Right, Robinson? Beaver fever. This is something, if you're drinking water and you're not drinking it, it is not a pretty picture. For the next few days when you're on a hike, pretty well, you're going to be having diarrhea significantly, and you're not going to be able to keep any food down, which can then lead dehydration. This lasts about 2 to 6 weeks. So when you got a good case of this doesn't go away. And there's really not a lot that doctors can do besides telling you to drink a lot of water. Your bowels are going to be upset, and you're basically going to be sitting on the toilet a lot. So that's why when you were, yeah.
So I don't know if you remember when I was in Scouts, as a youth, we went to Calabogie, Canada, and we're boiling our basic filtering and boiling our water all week, right? No problem. And what we found, my dad was along. He was a scoutmaster. We got home, and about a week later, he was sick, like you said, for about 6 weeks. He was off of work for like 6 weeks and couldn't leave the toilet, essentially. And it was pretty scary. And here was this beaver parasite, and he got it from brushing his teeth. We were just cleaning our toothbrush out in the water, out in the lake area. We were right on an island in this lake, and he was rinsing his toothbrush off in the water is how he got it.
Wow.
So, everybody's drinking water and using water that we're filtering and boiling, except
rinsing your toothbrush.
Except for rinsing our toothbrushes. And so it's just lucky he's the only one that got it, to be honest.
Well, and he just probably did his toothbrush in an area where the water maybe swirled and got stagnant a little bit. But those parasites are really tiny. I mean, it doesn't take that many to start growing in your body. It's amazing, and they definitely replicate and grow within a short amount of time. I think it takes usually how long did it take him? About 2 days to get sick? Do you remember? I think it's about.
I guess it was about 2 to 3 days after we got back, he started to feel bad.
Yeah, because it has to replicate. Usually you don't have a strong enough concentration. It only takes so many to come in. So, but that's why, again, guys, we're using, I'll just go and take a drink here and take a drink there. And I remember on the Appalachian Trail that one time, remember that lady from Australia? She never filters any water on the entire Appalachian Trail. Remember her?
Yeah,
Lucas,
that's a tough woman right there.
Yeah. I was like, I'm not sure about that. There's some times where the water's coming out of pipes, and I feel fairly comfortable. But when you got some water that can sit, you can have a dead animal upstream. You can just have, somebody who decided to go to the bathroom too close to the stream, and that's what builds up these parasites. So
yeah, Isaac Talkington.
Talkington, not peeing on the place where we get our water. Peabody. So that's the one thing I wanted to mention about the beaver fever, but that's why it's important we filter water when we're on the trail, guys. If you're not bringing it from home, you got to filter it. Protozoa is another thing that gets eliminated with the water treatment. And then, of course, the chemicals they talk about, nitrogen and phosphates. And like Mr. Kreiser had said, a lot of it comes Pennsylvania off for running because of the things we add to our gardens or yards or farms. So a lot of those are getting into the water, and that can make you sick. The human body isn't meant to have those in high levels. So that's pretty well something why we treat water. So moving along, disposal of solids and waste in the wilderness camping. So we're at home, we get to go to the bathroom, it goes down either a septic or anything. What happens when we're on camping? So the common rule we always say on Scouts, guys, pack it in, pack it out. Inspect your campsite rest areas for trash, spilled foods, and anything that's left over you should pack out. Now, deposit human waste, they have a picture there how to dig it. And again, we always say 6 to 8 inches. And that's why I typically try to dig out a little hole too, even when I'm urinating. And they always say, remember not to pee on the trees because animals come up and they eat that and it can destroy the bark, destroy the trees. So it's always good to dig some kind of hole regardless of your waste, but particularly for solids, you want to dig a hole 6 to 8 inches, and it wants to be 200 feet from water, camp, or trails. Now, this is important because the one thing that occurred in a lot of camps, especially in the Civil War, is the reason a lot of these guys in these camps were getting sick. What they found out is there was more dysentery, diarrhea, and disease during the Civil War that caused more death than actually people getting shot. And the reason being is they were getting lazy. They'd walk out the back of their camp, they'd go to the bathroom, they'd kick a few leaves on it, and that's fine. But when you have a few hundred men and you're doing this over about a 2-week period, it starts really adding up. So that's seeping into the waterways. You're getting mosquitoes, you're getting all the other critters that build up, and that's why you get sick. So on a camping trip, regardless if we're the only people there for a week or whatever, we want to get that covered down. And just like Mr. Kreiser said, the reason being, once it's under the ground, what happens? The bacteria breaks it down. It decomposes it, just like would be in a sewer plant. And again, the important thing is being away from the water, or camp, or trails. they say about packing out toilet paper. You can buy that toilet paper that breaks down and degrades very easily. It's a little thinner to use. However, it's a nice product to have because then you know it's going to break down. Because I think it's always a hard thing to go and put that in a container and pack it out. But if you're getting the disposable stuff, I'm okay with that, but it's something to keep in problem. Some of the white things that we use, they don't break down and degrade as well, so you should be reluctant to use it unless it's a specialized one that is biodegradable, and that's something you want to have that buried as well. If you don't bury it down deep, not only will it not break down, the other things, animals will dig it up, so now it's not buried anymore. So that's why you want to have it under the ground a certain amount of time. And remember, to wash yourself or dishes, carry water 200 feet away from streams or lakes. So when you're washing it, we should use a biodegradable soap too. And that's another thing, because if that soap builds in, if you're having 30 kids at a campsite and you keep washing your dishes with non-biodegradable, all that product is now going into, and chemicals is going into the stream. So the next campsite down over where the water's going, all of a sudden now they're going to get this contaminated product. So that's what we want to be doing and rinsing this stuff out away from the stream. Okay? One, two, four. All right, so this is something I took a picture of for one in my hiking stuff that I haven't. Now, this I had as a wet one, but this is something I'd have to pack out because these aren't biodegradable. I have a hand sanitizer here. This camp sud you can see on to the left here is a concentrated camp sud. And there's about 3 or 4 other products you can buy online. This is concentrated and it is biodegradable. So this is something that's environmental safe. When we go on our boating trip in May, it's very important also for our sun stand screen that it's also coral safe as well. So these are products you want to carry. Right below the camp sud in the middle is my white toilet paper that I actually put around a paper roll. I wrap it and I compress it down. And of course, my handy little shovel that's meant to dig that 6 to 8 inch hole. And I keep all these in individual plastic, and then you can see the red carrier to the side. I keep all these in one bag, so when I'm on a camping trip, I know where all these products are and I don't have to dig them out. So this is something I'll take with me when I'm hiking or when camping overnight, especially on the 50-miler. And when you're on that 50-miler out, having something to clean yourself and go to the bathroom is like gold. And again, the biodegradable soap is very important for that, for the environment. So that's why we do these products. And I'm trying to think. And I think that might be the last thing of, yes, the other thing is food service. So is any other questions for Mr. Kreiser regarding anything between his presentation or the video? Anybody?
Question. There's
Yes.
that you mentioned the cholera and typhoid, and that actually was the reason he brought up the big stink in the video, but in reality, they were having cholera and typhoid outbreaks in Britain, in London and other towns.
Yeah.
And in the 1850s, they linked those breakouts to untreated sewage or wastewater getting into their groundwater supply, because even in the cities, they simply had outhouses and cesspools, okay? So once they realized that they were polluting their own drinking water, that's when they started building collection systems. They didn't actually start treating it, they simply started transporting it out of the city and into the rivers because they were using wells as a source of drinking water. But it was, like I say, the 1850s, doing research, they realized that cholera and typhoid were waterborne diseases.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I know in the 1800s, there was huge outbreaks that started 40s, 50s, and 60s. They were having it all over the world. Even in the 1900s, they were still having them.
Right. But again, that was the areas that had started to develop wastewater systems. It wasn't occurring there as frequently as it was in the undeveloped countries.
Yeah, and actually when even I know in the times when the Americas were being developed, I think some of the reasons around the Incas and some of the Indians in South America that they were getting infections. They actually think it was cholera. They're not 100% sure because there's no scientific data, but they actually think that as the Europeans came in and started polluting everything, they actually think some of the native Indians were getting cholera outbreaks. There's some theories on that too. So that goes back all the way back to the 1400s then too. It just wasn't documented as well, but that's probably why they were getting all diarrhea. So, all right, well, let's thank everybody. Let's thank Mr. Kreiser for being present tonight and give us almost a virtual tour of a sewer plant. Let's give him a round of applause. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Mr. Kreiser.
He's better.
Yeah. So glad I ate dinner before
Thank
this.
you for having me. I hope everybody stays safe and this quarantine thing June is over.
That's great. Well, thanks a lot, Mike. Like I said, you're welcome to stay on. If not, that's fine too. We're just going to do a few more minutes here, so whatever you want to do.
I'm going to check out because I haven't eaten dinner yet.
You got it. All right. Stay hi to Chris. All right.
Good night.
Thanks a lot, Mike. Appreciate it. Thanks again.
Yep.
All right. Hey, Tim, can you go back to slide 22 for me? Jump it back. We're going to at least finish up immunization here tonight and at least get through that, and then we'll have to pick up with some of the other stuff here. But that was really great and thorough. I knew that he'd be able to kind of explain everything in a way of not even going to the facility, but he knows more than anybody I know about water treatment plants. All right, so we're going to pick up where we left off before about the vaccine process. Now, this is really involved, and the reason I have some of this information in here is because everybody thinks we just magically pop these vaccines out every year. And, well, why doesn't it work harder than what it is? And making a vaccine, especially and we're talking about the flu here, is not an easy process. Some vaccines that were produced for certain things had to be pulled off the market because there were some side effects and situations, and then had to be reinstituted. Sometimes that same pharmaceutical wasn't even able to fix the problem, and another pharmaceutical had to come out with it. So for the flu, typically what they do to isolate is there's typically 3 strains that they try to treat each year for the flu vaccine. Typically they pick 2 A's and 1B. We're going to go into the quadrivalent type inactivations as well, but we're going to start off with the first 3. So they're picking 2 A's and 1B. So from start to finish, these 3 strains are targeted the vaccine and production of the final product. And what it is, the World Health Organization will typically pick these 3 strains every year. And typically from a selection process, they try to pick one of the A's or one of the B's that was the most commonly encountered the year prior. Now, that being said, again, we have 90 different strain variations of the flu. So you understand why we're picking 3 for 90 different variations of type A. And so we're picking 3 out of 90. So that's why sometimes it's like throwing a dart at a target, hoping that you hit it with your eyes closed. Now, sometimes they get it pretty selective and they do really well, as high as 80%, and sometimes it's a lot less than that. So it does vary. So what they do usually around February, they decide what strains they will then pick and isolate. At that point, for about 4 or 5 months, they then get these 3 vaccines, which are then isolated, and they tested as they manufacture them for purity and potency. At that point, they're separate. They haven't combined them yet. After the individual testing, as they test on certain models, they then will combine it into a single seasonal vaccine. So they pick it in February. They manufacture the 3 individual strains. They put them together. They test them individually, and they put them together in June and July. So now you're seeing from February to June. So you're already seeing 4 to 5 months of this process that's taken to get to this point. Again, we have no idea in the summer what kind of flu vaccine is going to be on the outbreak coming in the fall season. We have to do this in advance. And the reason at that point is then mass produce that three strain of vaccine into mass production, so it can distribute to the pharmacies and the doctors that it's ready in the early fall, so before the flu season starts. That's available. So you always see the signs go up, now available flu vaccine, and it's present. So you can get it from your doctor, and pharmacies are doing a lot of it now. And it just seems to be a little easier to go in and get that as opposed to your doctor, but it's available both things. with that. When you look at the history of it, in the case of a pandemic, one of the interesting flus that broke out was in 2009, and that was the H1N1 influenza vaccine, to where they had to come up with a quicker vaccine system that was a little more potent to this pandemic. Up till then, they were just doing the vaccine, but this was a different vaccine. This was a different virus that actually afflicted younger people as opposed to older people, and it was pretty aggressive back in 2009. Now, a lot of times we don't hear about these. They just marked it as the typical influenza, so everybody just saw it was a regular flu, but it was actually a lot more dangerous than that. They then come out with a quicker process that if there was something that broke out, they were trying to get vaccines, but it's still a process and it still takes time. So when you get an outbreak, you can't come out with a vaccine a month or two later. That's false. It doesn't happen. And that's what we're noticing coronavirus. This is going to take a while to isolate, to produce, test it, not from animal models, but on similar humans, start the testing, and then go into mass production where we have billions of units to be distributed along the entire world. So that's why this process is going to take long. Now, we talked about a quadrivalent. This is where you have 4 strands. You have 2 Bs and 2 As, and that's something. They did release this in 2013, and this had to be pulled off the market. They were having complications with it, and then it became through a different company in 2014. It became available for the flu season. So there are times when you come out for a vaccine, you think it's okay, and after you do the testing, you realize there are times where the human body can react to these, and if that reaction is too significant, then it has to be altered. And again, it's a process of getting an active component, whether it be the protein of it or what we call a plasmid, injecting it and producing it so the body can build antibodies. So you got to make sure that the vaccine is potent, but you got to also make sure it's safe. And I have a friend of mine that I know from my biochemistry degree who actually works on these out in Allentown. And if you want to have an interesting probably discussion for me, but maybe boring for you, you ought to see what they go through to do these vaccines. It's unbelievable. It's such a process. So it's a really involved field. And if something you guys want to get into is bioengineering and all that kind of stuff, it's really a fascinating, career. With that. But that's what the vaccine's like. It's not just you put it in a tube, you make it, mass produce it, and voila, there's the vaccine. It's a very complicated process. So we talked about some additional vaccines that we're talking about. They have the meningococcal disease. That's not something we got. Now it's available that they're doing for kids. And that's for Neisseria meningitis bacteria. So this is what usually causes certain pneumonias and also a lot of times both meningitis and sepsis. And this is something that's been added over the last few years that was not available when we were younger as us adults. Another additional vaccine that's available is human papilloma infection, HPV vaccines. Now, again, I'm not going to promote or dismiss any of this. You guys as younger as kids, this is something that's in common discussion, but between you, your parents, and your doctor, this is something. I'm not going to get into the politics of this. This is something you guys want to discuss as far as with the vaccination. They're studying it now. I think it's as young as, 10, 11 is the earliest you can get this, but it might be 11, 12. We have another screen coming up of when that's being done. And this is something that's passed as sexually transmitted, which causes genital warts. And what they're having is, if for women that doesn't get detected, it can lead to cancer, cervical cancer for women. So this is one of the reasons that they're doing the vaccinations. Again, I'm not going to get into the politics. Now, the one thing I am going to say is that just because you get vaccinated for HPV does not mean you are protected against other sexually transmitted diseases. That is a false. And I sometimes hear parents think, well, as long as they have that vaccine, they're not going to get STDs. And that's completely false. You still have all the other, you got herpes, and gonorrhea, syphilis, you got all these other diseases, HIV, hepatitis. So these are still things sexually transmitted you can get. So the one thing I do want to say about it, just because you have the HPV vaccine, you still have to understand about protective sex, okay? I'm not going to get into more than that, some of the younger scouts, but it is something I want to tell the older kids. It's a falsehood to say that this protects you against everything else. It only protects you against HPV, and that's what I'm going to leave it at that, okay? Shingles is something now we're getting it for elderly individuals. When you have the chicken pox when you're younger, what happens when you get older? Then you can develop the herpes zoster. This is a very uncomfortable condition. This is usually follows a certain nerve distribution along your body. It can be a quadrant of your chest, lower abdomen, lower back. It's actually very painful because it irritates and it grows in the nerve endings. It almost feels like your skin's on fire. So even a light touch or a probe, even a shirt sometimes is uncomfortable for people. And this is something that is recommended. I recommend it for a lot of my seniors, 60 or older, even over 55 now. They're saying if you had the chicken pox or something, you ought to be vaccinated. And I do think it's because if you can still get the herpes infection. However, the shingles, it's usually less severe, and it usually goes away a little quicker with antiviral treatment, and it doesn't prolong. Otherwise, it can go on for months without the vaccination if you don't have the vaccine. The virus does remain in your body. It's located around nerve clusters, and with time, whatever reason, being stress, weakened immune system, it can erupt. So this is something once you're prone to it as a kid. Chickenpox is not a big disease. It's not a lot of people, but when you get the shingles when you're older, it's actually very uncomfortable. So this is something for people. They have the 50 to 64. You have 2 doses, and then they have also the live, the ZVL that you can get after 65, and that's a single. And they do it based on ages. So if you're 50 to 64, you get the 2-dose treatment. If you're over 65, you get the single shot. So that's the additional ones. Talking about the one thing vaccinations has eliminated, which has been nice, is we talk about smallpox. This is something that was still very active in the Civil War at that point, and a lot of the people around towns and cities were getting vaccinations. The problem is the Civil War was drawing people from a lot of rural areas. And New York and upstate New York, when you went down to areas around out west, around Kentucky and around that, you'd put all these people in a camp together. Some people were vaccinated, some people weren't. All of a sudden, we started having smallpox outbreaks in camps. And this was actually was pretty significant and hard on a lot of adults, and there was a lot of death. Again, we talked about dysentery and other diarrhea in camp. We also will talk about, smallpox and other things. So before we came out with this vaccination, something like these conditions here could be very devastating to the entire military base. So what they tried to do, if they weren't pushed, they'd have the younger people come into camp for a few days. So if they did get an outbreak, they could rest and then get immune to it, and they were ready for fighting. But sometimes they didn't have the time to wait. So sometimes they were on the march, and all of a sudden people started coming down with smallpox, and this was a problem. True story, they decided that if you would, especially in the Confederate area, they were running out of the vaccine. So what they decided for the people that were breaking out with this blistering rash, they would scrape them, break it open, and they would inoculate it on the other soldiers on their skin. They would then develop the smallpox, become immune to it, and this seemed to be like a great system because they ran out of vaccines. And a lot of the northern ships are blockading the shipments coming in for the vaccine. The problem is what they weren't aware of is there was actually outbreaks of syphilis at the same time. Syphilis looks very similar to smallpox. So what they were actually doing for the people who had syphilis, they were infecting other soldiers with syphilis when they thought it was smallpox. So they learned after a little bit of time the doctors should be organizing these type of things. So when you break something open and put it in another body, you might not know what you're growing. So you got to be careful with it. But that was a true story that happened in the Civil War, is the cross-contamination. But if it was done right with the smallpox, it was a way to provide almost like a vaccine, but you just had to make sure that's what the disease was. And it's in the early stages, it was kind of hard to tell the difference between the two. So again, at the bottom left there, we talk about the fluid-filled pustules that expand over an area. They would then break, scab over. Once they scab over, a short amount of time after, you became actually immune to it. You build up the antibodies, so you could do it through natural immunity or in these cases of the vaccine. The transmission is expressed by close contact or by touching the sores or through respiratory droplets, and that's how it was being spread in these military camps because these soldiers were close together. About 30% of smallpox cases ended in death. And that's a pretty high number, 30%. So when you had these outbreaks and these new soldiers coming in, all of a sudden you're losing about 1/3 of the new soldiers before they even start fighting, or maybe even during their basic training. This was pretty devastating, some of the numbers in the Civil War. And some of the other problems that occur was deformities. This would actually cause erosion so significant around your upper airways, your nose, your lips, and that thing. They would actually get a pretty severe infections where it caused gangrene, and they'd have to have those parts of their body removed. Another thing was blindness. It would affect your cornea. So this was something, this is one of the few things that vaccinations have basically annihilated. There is no new case of smallpox now in a long time. It's one of the few conditions that's been eradicated with vaccines to this common date. We still have outbreaks of other things, but smallpox has been held up, but we never know what's around the corner. So we talk about annual vaccinations. The flu is one thing you can get from year to year. I recommend, again, this to my seniors who are immunocompromised or elderly. Also is the shingles vaccine we talked about. And also for the elderly, I also talk about the pneumococcal conjugate, which I also recommend for them. So because a lot of seniors get pneumonia as well. Tetanus is also, again, periodically recommend again every 10 years to get your booster. And there's different ways to administer that so you're protected, especially if you're walking outside around different objects that can cut your skin. So the other requirement that we talked about, these are the things that there's no immunization. And again, I want to talk about these things you cannot be immunized against. So it's gonorrhea, West Nile, Zika virus, botulism, syphilis, emphysema, herpes, lead poisoning, food poisoning, E. coli, salmonella, AIDS, encephalitis, and Lyme's. Now, when they talk about AIDS, we have gotten away that once you have it, we've had antivirals that can eliminate it down to such a small amount that it's not even traceable that you consider you're non-infectious. But there is not a way to immunize against that. You have to be treated after you contract it. So again, when people get that HPV vaccine, again, when you look at this left column, what are you also susceptible to if you have an unprotected sex is gonorrhea, syphilis, herpes, AIDS, and also hepatitis. So just because there aren't vaccines for these, that's why you still got to use common sense and be smart about these conditions in life. Immunization, things you can be immunized for, hepatitis A and B, the influenza or flu. Again, that's not 100%. It's just what we're trying to do is eliminate a percentage high. And also some meningitis, the meningococcal disease is the one thing that we can now immunize with as being done. That wasn't available when we were younger. All right. And I think here gives a list, basically a charting grid. It's kind of washed out, unfortunately, but gives you a grid of what times from months to years. And this is what pediatricians and doctors follow when you would normally give these vaccines. We had talked about them last time. And down to that, we talk about the tetanus and every so many years. And then the other diseases as he goes down through there, you can immunize for with it. Now, some of these on the bottom is if you did not have them as a child, you can get them as an adult too. And that's what they talk about. And again, down at the bottom, recurrent vaccination for adult, influenza annually, tetanus every 10 years. And I think that was, okay. So going in, what time do we have? I think we're pushing to the end. I guess I'll have to save this till next week then. But I wanted to get a nice, coverage of the water treatment and all that, because I think that's something for all the diseases that are in the world. We talk about these outbreaks and everything else. The fact that our country has a really good water treatment system and knowledge of that is really important. And that's the one thing where I think some of these organizations, such as the WHO, have done a good job to try to provide drinking water and safe. So we're going to get into drinking water next time, and we'll start from that point there. So I think I'll just close it, Tim, because if I start on this, I'll probably go longer. Okay. Is there any questions on immunization or anything else, Scouts, at all that I covered there before I turn it over to our senior patrol leader? Okay. If not, I will hand it over and we can close it up.
All right. So I guess everyone, Scout sign and Scout law. Scout is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. Now would everyone please take off their hats and bow their heads for the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen.
All right, before we go our own ways, everybody stay safe and stay healthy. Christian, was there any last minute things you wanted to have scouts look over before next week?
There we go. I just wanted to unmute there. Yeah, basically we're gonna pick up for drinking water. We're gonna cover that real quick on vectors. And the one thing is, I did send over to you, Tim, that video for the food service thing. I wanted to know if you could maybe forward that to the scouts that they could watch the video beforehand if they want. All right. Because if everybody watches it, we wouldn't have to watch it during the thing. We could actually just have them watch it and we can just talk about it afterwards.
All right.
Maybe it'll be something good for everybody to do. It's only about a 10-minute video, but it's a nice layout of food service out. And it actually goes over a really good job of preparing food, how to cook, how to store, all that kind of stuff. So basically it's like walking through a food kitchen. So I'd like you guys to all watch that till next time, and then we can just go over to try to save us time. That way we don't have to spend as much time just watching the video. All right?
One quick update, and then we'll do the final closing and wrap things up. For those scouts that are planning on attending summer camp, you should have received an email yesterday. At this point, summer camp is still planned to go ahead as scheduled. However, that is subject to change as we get a little closer and more information is available and we understand more where things are at with COVID-19. It sounds like there is a date being May 12th that council is actually going to be meeting to discuss what the plans are for summer camp. That will be really the telltale of whether we will be having summer camp or not. But in the meantime, we do have a deadline of May 15th that we have to have all the final payments in. So if you're not familiar with the email that went out, it basically said that send in your payment to Stacy Gausch, which is our troop treasurer. Stacy will hold those funds until we see what the date is, because we only have about 2 days or so after that announcement comes to have all the final payments in if things are truly moving forward and we're going to have camp. If we do not have that, then we will either return the funding or destroy the checks. So that way there's no money out of pocket for that. But I just want to make sure you all were aware of that. So roughly about May 12th, maybe in the 13th, depending on when they release the information to us, we'll have a better idea of where things stand for summer camp. All right. I see fingers pointing at buttons. Anyhow, we'll wrap things up and all that. So may the great Scoutmaster of all Scouts be with you until we meet again.
Be prepared.
And the Navy rules, Air Force